Coming up, a Tennessee assistant defends Butch Jones, but do Vols fans want to hear it? Plus, Kirby Smart gets testy with reporters. It's all on the way next on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, welcome to AT&T's SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're getting closer to game week coming up on Saturday. We've got a lot of developments around the SEC, including a lot of fan bases who I think are just about fed up with their coaches and their programs and got everything in between.
This has been the most intense week of trash talk we've had so far, even including obviously the Vanderbilt players. And so I think that's going to be fun to get into. I look forward to hearing everybody in the comment section today.
Before we dive into our first and 10, I'll remind you that this is AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live, entertainment your way. That's what AT&T likes to remind you. And we'll start with our AT&T SEC Country Live first and 10 list, and we look back on Saturday's loss for Tennessee against Florida, and the final second touchdown that goes down there, and really everything else involved in a loss for Tennessee that has led to a lot of criticism for Butch Jones. We chronicled some of that yesterday, but on today's program, we hear audio here from Tennessee defensive coordinator Bob Shoop, who, while the rest of the media and many fans may be coming to the criticism of Butch Jones, Shoop actually comes to Jones' defense. Take a listen to this and see if you agree with where he's coming from.
I want to say this, and this is from my heart. I think some of the criticism of Coach Jones is unfair. You know, I made the call on the last play, and I'll talk about what went into the thinking on that and all those things. The thing I give this team, and him specifically, a lot of credit for, 2 weeks ago we go to Georgia Tech, we're down 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter of the game against a Paul Johnson coach team that rarely ever loses a game when they're up in the second half. And the players had the fortitude, the coaching staff had the
So I think the thing that some
calmness
fans gonna have a problem
to help the team come back and win that game. And this week
he talks about, hey, you came back against Georgia Tech, a team that doesn't lose when they're in the lead, but Tennessee was a point spread favorite in that game. Why should Tennessee be losing at any point to Georgia Tech? And then Bob Shoop says, hey, Tennessee came back twice after getting down 10 points to Florida. But why in the world should this Tennessee team be down double digits to Florida more than once in the same game? I mean, he seems to want to give Tennessee and his boss, Butch Jones, some credit for some things that Tennessee, I don't think, should ever be experiencing. And I know for a fact a lot of Vols fans don't think they should be experiencing.
Well, listen, I think it's a smart move by Bob Shoop. You're a guy whose defense gave up 500 yards rushing to Georgia Tech. You were the reason they were down so bad. You give up the 63-yard pass at the end of the game. I won't call it a Hail Mary. Florida fans climbed all over me yesterday for calling it a Hail Mary. But you're the one that gave up that pass at the end of the game. And I think that's the reason he has Butch's back, is because Butch has had his back so far. And I think he did a good job of explaining how the last play defense developed yesterday through some of the monologue with the reporters. I think he did a good job. Obviously, I'm not backing Butch Jones, but I think he did a good job of pleading his case in Butch Jones' favor.
You do think that? I'm really surprised that you feel that way, because Jimmy Welch in the comment section says, how do you run 7 plays inside the 10, all of them passes, with the best running back in the conference? He's obviously referencing John Kelly, who may or may not be that guy. But that's another example of why a lot of people were kind of fed up with Jones from Saturday. And to me, Bob Shoop, and this is the thing that is scary if you're a Tennessee fan, Shoop sounds like he's kind of caught Butch Jones' disease here a little bit. I mean, Shoop, I thought, was actually a pretty smooth, swift move when Jones made it to hire him before the start of the 2016 season. I thought that was a pretty big free agent acquisition. But now, after 12 months of living under, Butch Jones's roof, all of a sudden he's echoing the kind of things that Butch Jones wants to say, essentially acting like Tennessee deserves some sort of participation trophy because they showed up in Gainesville, as opposed to doing what Vols fans expect them to do, which is go on the road and win the dadgum game.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Listen, but it's Bob Shoop's fault that they were down so big in some of those games. You want to talk about, they had to come back and score a couple of points and get back in. Butch Jones is the reason they were able to come back in those games. Butch Jones kept them. Bob Shoop's defense got them down in those games. And listen, I hate the way this last play has evolved, because I think it was actually decent defense by Bob Shoop. I think he just got burned over the top in a weird circumstance. But I obviously hate the goal line calls from Butch Jones. I think the offense was operating at a high level when you were giving Kelly the ball in the backfield. Weren't able to do that. And I hate the Garantano excuse. I hate the excuses coming from Butch Jones. But I don't mind them coming from the defensive coordinator. I think he's just trying to have his head coach's back.
Maggie Shaw says, why don't we keep playing comeback in every game? Maggie, that's kind of my point. John Rosado says, Florida was the favorite. You're right. I was referencing the Georgia Tech game earlier in which Tennessee was a point spread favorite. But even in the game in which Florida was a point spread favorite, there's still no excuse for two teams that ought to be playing both as programs historically and as individual teams here in 2017 on equal footing, there's no excuse for dealing with double-digit deficits twice in that game.
Yeah, listen, it was on both sides of the ball, too. I mean, both of these teams looked ugly. I think if you ask both fan bases, it was an ugly victory for Florida and an ugly loss for Tennessee, the way things came about. I think if Tennessee had eked this one out, a lot of people wouldn't be talking about the goal line call from Kelly, and it wouldn't be talking about some of the defenses they used in this game. I think the fact that they lost really kind of highlights some of the shortcomings Butch Jones has had as a head coach.
Mike Simmons says fire Butch, and listen, I'm not here out for blood. I'm not here to start, getting scalps from all these SEC coaches who may get fired at the end of the season. But if you're a Tennessee fan and you're fed up with Jones, I do kind of understand where you're coming from here. And for me, it's not the wins and losses so much as it is the way that he talks about the wins and losses. Because it was also Jones who wanted to act like his team deserved some sort of credit for fighting to the end against Florida. As we said on yesterday's show, that's what you're supposed to do.
No, trust me, and it has been a participation type of monologue that Butch Jones has been giving out about this football team, but that goes along with what's been happening in his entire stay there as Tennessee head coach. At no point has he even tried to back off of it. I think, yesterday he even says, we're ticked off, we're upset about this, and we've got to go back to the drawing board. How mad are you really, though, Butch Jones? I know that you're mad that people are talking about you as a head coach and talking about your football team losing a game, but I don't see any future, at least not this season, where Tennessee comes out and plays with a chip on their shoulder. I'm not sure Butch Jones has that club in the bag.
James Crump says Bob Stoops is going for Butch Jones' job. I think it may actually be the opposite of this, James. I think this may be one of those cases where Shoop realized he left a pretty good thing at Penn State. That's the number 4 team in the country right now. And he left a good thing to come down here to Knoxville. The truth is if Jones gets fired, it's not like they're going to hang around and keep Shoop. He's gone too. Now, I'm sure he'll work again somewhere else, but he realized, that paycheck, that gravy train sort of depends on Butch Jones kind of figuring some of this stuff out a little bit.
I was going to say Bob Stoops and Bob Shoop going for the job are two completely different different talking points. We got to make sure we clarify which one of those Bobs is actually going for Butch's job.
Yeah, that may be a really good point. All right, we'll have more of your comments coming up in the comments section here on AT&T's SEC Country Live. For now, let's move on to item number 2 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And from one coach to another, this time Georgia coach Kirby Smart, who met with the media on Tuesday. And when he met with the media, he was asked questions about the state of the Georgia offensive line. And Kirby Smart, a little surprising here, kind of pushed back on the question about how happy he was with what his offensive line had been doing this season and how they're grading out so far this year. Listen to Kirby Smart get a little testy with reporters here and see if you agree with his point.
How have they graded in terms of the physical nature? Do you guys just savor for me to say something negative about our offensive line? I feel like every day I come in, y'all asking how's the offensive line grade? Well, we grade based on effort, toughness, and assignment. They graded well on that. Now, if they can't move a person that's bigger than them and they try to move them, is that a minus grade or is that a positive grade? They're grading good. So if you want to know how they're grading, they're grading well. My mom's an English teacher. She says you should say well. They're grading well. But are we getting what we want out of them? No. I'm not completely happy with that. I'm not happy with the way our corners press. You know what I mean? I'm not happy that we don't have any interceptions. So there's all kinds of improvement that needs to be on our team. I think our offensive line coach, they work really hard to improve. But we are not where we need to be. So y'all can email me any suggestions you guys might have. Serious.
So pretty funny stuff from Kirby Smart there. You get a little bit of a grammar lesson about using well as opposed to good, but also you talk about participation trophies. That was sort of a surprising statement from Kirby Smart, and then it seems like he wants to give his offensive line a little bit of credit for trying. Hey, smaller guys going up against bigger guys, at least they're trying, at least they're doing their best. I feel like I know Kirby Smart to be a different kind of coach than that. And I feel like that whatever he's saying to the media here, that can't be what he really thinks behind closed doors, right? He can't be happy with the play of his offensive line thus far this season, can he?
The player in me that used to play under Kirby Smart, that used to be in the same locker room for me is like, good job, Kirby. You got these guys back. They're trying really hard. There's a lot of effort there. They're tough. They're tough offensive linemen. They're grinding. They had a bunch of yards last week against Samford. The SEC country version of me is like, Kirby, you're lying. There's no way you're telling the truth. When you look at it, he said effort, toughness, and assignment's what we grade on. How about technique? How about a pancake block? How about not bouncing off some of the defensive line?
How about doing your job and opening a hole for your All-American running back, Nick Chubb, to run through?
Exactly. And I think, if you look at the first two series from last week's game against Samford, really both sides of this were highlighted. When you're going for it on fourth down against Samford on the first series, you have penetration in the backfield. They're able to make a tackle for loss. And then you come back out and you hand it to Nick Chubb, and the offensive line looks like a different unit. They're able to march it right down the field, ripping off 10, 15, and 20-yard gains at a time. That shows me the offensive line has the ability. There's just something that's not clicking when they come out of the box right now to begin that game, specifically against Samford last week. They weren't clicking in the right direction. I think that's what Kirby's pointing to. Hey, we had a good game. I know we had some ugly spots, but when you look at the overall statistics and what we did, we actually had a decent game up front.
So here's why this matters to me. And I know we have a lot of Georgia fans that watch us on AT&T's SEC Country Live. What I'm about to say is something that you know full well. There's a lot of play calling decisions made by Georgia offensive coordinator Jim Chaney this season that just flat out don't make any sense apart from, well, Georgia clearly doesn't trust its offensive line. Go back and look at some of the struggles during the Notre Dame game. Now, I excuse some of those struggles because I assume that this was Georgia trying to run away from the middle of the field and get away from an interior offensive line they just didn't think was going to be able to get a push. But if Kirby Smart says these guys are grading fine, then how do you go back and explain those plays? The truth is, I'm going to not believe what Kirby Smart says publicly. I'm going to trust what I think he's saying privately because if you trust your offensive line, you think they're grading out fine, you don't call some of the plays that Georgia has called in big moments so far this season and some of the play calls that I still expect to see against Mississippi State on Saturday.
Yeah, and listen, I think if you're a Georgia fan, the way you kind of line up this game in your mind, that's what makes you nervous. I think that when you look at Georgia's defense, you feel good about what they're going to put on the field against Nick Fitzgerald, Harris Williams, and this offense from Mississippi State. Dan Mullen versus Kirby Smart. It's going to be a heck of a coaching matchup when it comes to those two sides of the ball. But what are you going to get out of Georgia's offense? Is the same Mississippi State D-line with Jeffrey Simmons and company going to show up that really stopped Darius Geis in a lot of situations last week and stopped that running game from LSU? That's what makes you nervous with Mississippi State coming into Athens this weekend and hoping they can't do some of the same things they did last week on defense.
JT Stronghold says, I truly can't wait to see what Georgia looks like when Mark Richt's thumbprint is completely off the program. You dogs might be in a similar situation as we are here in Knoxville. He's obviously referencing Philip Fulmer, who some Tennessee fans grew tired of, and maybe now they wish they had back. I think in Mark Richt's case, Georgia may be a little different, especially on this topic we're talking about right now with the Georgia offensive line. The fact is, Richt did a lot of good things at Georgia, won 2 SEC championships. But he dropped the ball when it comes to offensive line recruiting. Dogs have not been putting linemen in the league, and the collection of 4- and 5-star talent, the way that Kirby Smart brought it in for the class of 2017 and 2016, Mark Richt wasn't really doing that. So Mark Richt's thumbprint of the Georgia program, right now, this is an example of a negative thumbprint on the program in that Richt did not take offensive line recruiting as seriously as he needed to, and Kirby Smart's having to try to play catch-up with that unit on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and I saw a comment on there earlier kind of comparing Kirby Smart to the way Nick Saban does things. And I got to tell you, when I was at Alabama, Nick Saban spent at least one day a week in this offensive room where he would come in there with the offensive line. He would want to know about the technique. He would want to know about the play calling. He had it micromanaged down to a science to where this is what I want to see on the offensive side of the ball. I'm not saying Kirby doesn't do that, but I can't say that he does for sure either. And I think that he has to start implementing what he wants to see on this offense and really sitting up under Jim Chaney, because I know Kirby knows what a good offense looks like. I know he knows what good play calling looks like. So I want to see him start to kind of lean on those guys a little bit more and maybe hold them more accountable.
Tra Duke says Kirby Smart's trying to give his line confidence, and the media is ruining that. Mind your business. Listen, that's totally fine. And I said this on Dog Nation Daily today when we played this same audio.
Yeah.
It's Kirby Smart's media availability. I think he can use it however he wants. But if you use it this way, you can't expect us not to notice that this doesn't feel consistent with some of the things you've said in the past. So you have every right to pick on the media if you want to. You have every right to kind of use this time to motivate your players or give them confidence. I got no problem with Kirby Smart using the media session for whatever he wants. But this is not even that good of an acting job.
Yeah, I mean, effort, toughness, and assignment. I mean, I think when you really start to look at those three things, I mean, you gotta think you could go up to Vanderbilt and every guy's going to get 100. I mean, you know what I mean? Those guys aren't going to miss assignments, and they're going to be smart with the way they play on the field. I think it's about just coming out of your hips, being able to move people off the ball. I think if you're double teaming a guy, especially a defensive tackle that they're going to see from Mississippi State this weekend, if you're doubling that guy and can't move him, guess what? That's a minus. I don't care what your effort looks like.
That's a really good point from a guy who played All-American level offensive line. Someone take him at his word there. One more comment on this. Bobby and Joanne Anderson Pike says, "Go Kirby, Nick taught you well." And that is true. Even though I think that Nick Saban probably chooses his spots carefully at this stage of his career, there's definitely an element of Kirby Smart that seemed to walk in the room wanting to try to pick up his offensive line. It definitely does take a page of the Nick Saban playbook a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the way that Nick Saban speaks back to his team through the media, I think that he understands this day and age. his team is going to follow certain people on Twitter. They're going to read certain stuff on Facebook and on some of these websites. And hey, Kirby Smart wanted his offensive line to know he had their back. And I think that that's probably going to be heard loud and clear in that offensive line room.
I've got this guy's back every single day. That's Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American. As I said, my name is Brandon Adams. This is AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T Entertainment your way. We'll move on. Look at item number 3 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Now, quickly, let me remind you of what happened yesterday when Nafileo, the Vanderbilt defensive lineman, talked a little bit of trash leading up to Saturday's game between the Commodores and Alabama. Now, he was on the field, maybe caught up in the moment, but as a reminder of what was said, let's let you see this.
Before you go, what kind of win is this for the program?
We expected to get this. When you come to our house, we show you how to play some SEC ball. It don't matter where you're from. You're going to know what ball we play. We're going to next week ranked. That's fine. Alabama, you're next.
So I got to tell you, that is the worst trash talk I have ever heard.
Oh, man.
The worst trash talk I've ever heard. First of all, you got it wrong, and they're not in the top 25, even though maybe they should be. The Alabama, you're next, sort of felt like, I don't know, does he really mean that or not? But there's not a lot of, I don't know, there's something missing from that, right? There's a little spice missing from that trash talk.
I'm so disappointed in this guy. Man, I really was. I had his back yesterday. I was like, man, you're from Vanderbilt. What do you have to lose by going out on a limb and being like, Bama, you're next? And here he backs off of it and says nothing but, he hashtags nothing but respect, and the way he kind of comes back from this thing, I was so disappointed.
Yeah, it's a good point. As bad as that trash talk is, it gets even worse when he starts backing off of it, because here's the post that LaFeo put out on social media here. The fact that social media going to blow up something just to turn some heads. All I meant is they're next to come into our house and play us. Take it how you want. We're ready for a heck of a ball game Saturday. As you said, the nothing but respect thing there at the end. I mean, this feels like a very Vanderbilt thing to do.
Yeah, it's absolutely
Give some sort of weak, half-hearted trash talk and then like apologize for it on social media.
Yeah.
This is a shame.
Not many people can say they have the opportunity to play the best program in college football. This is a team you're going to line up against this weekend, and I loved it when he came out and said it. No, the delivery was a little bit weak. I will give you that, but I loved what him trying to make a statement after a huge win. The emotion gets the best of him, and he says, "You know what, Bama, you're next." I loved it, and it was only because it was coming from Vanderbilt that I was like, man, this guy, you know what? What's going to happen if he's wrong? Nobody's going to be like, oh, Vanderbilt lost to Bama, aha. I mean, he had a pedestal to stand on, and he said it, and then he backtracked. I was disappointed.
Bobby J. Smith says Vandy's going to get smoked on Saturday. A lot of Alabama fans are kind of, hungry, tasting for an SEC win here after a couple of weeks of playing less than stellar competition. But I guess, I'll rephrase the question that I asked you yesterday, which is, how much is Alabama using this? You said yesterday that this is not really a Nick Saban thing. This probably doesn't rise to his level, more of a Scott Cochran thing. But, is there a reason to think that a Vanderbilt player would regret saying this, that you do want to try to catch Bama sleeping to a certain extent?
I think if this was a rivalry game, if somebody from Auburn or Tennessee or maybe even LSU had said this would be something that would be held on a little bit higher esteem. If somebody from Auburn, say Ken Pedway, came out and said, Bama, you're next, I think we'd be sitting there talking about it. It'd be the lead of the show. I think that it comes from Vanderbilt. It's probably, it's hung up, it's talked about, it's said, but I don't think that you're going to prepare any harder or any less hard if you're Alabama as a team because this Vanderbilt defensive lineman came out and said what he said.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you kind of make the comparison between Vanderbilt and another SEC team. The same thing is true in this regard. If a typical SEC team beat a ranked opponent as a point spread underdog and then hosted Alabama the next week, we'd be treating that as a very big game, and we'd be treating that team, even if it's an underdog, which Vanderbilt is this week, we'd still be treating that as kind of an interesting game to watch, and maybe this team can give Alabama a scare. I will admit, though, because this is Vanderbilt in comparison to Alabama, I'm assuming that Alabama probably shows its teeth a little bit on Saturday. Am I underrating Vanderbilt right now?
I think maybe a little bit. I think this game is relatively close at halftime. I'm thinking maybe like 17-10, Bama leading at halftime, but Bama starts to pull away in the end, and here's why. I'm not sure Vanderbilt has the athletes at the second level. I love Warren Burks at the linebacking core, but in the secondary, I'm not sure they have the athletes that when Jalen Hurts is using those quick passes, when they're getting the ball out of his hand like he's been known to do this year, I'm not sure they can cover our wide receivers in space. Calvin Ridley, Robert Foster, a lot of those other guys that are going to be lining up against that Vanderbilt secondary. I think at some point one of those guys makes a play and their athleticism starts to pull away in this game.
Jeremy Pettis says Vandy players should be smart enough to realize Bama is their daddy. Maybe on Saturday they'll remember that after not being aware of that today. Let me hit a few more of these comments as well. A lot of Kirby talk, a lot of Butch Jones talk here. A lot of Tennessee fans really kind of fired up on the program today. Aaron Burrell kind of agreeing with us that the trash talk from the Vandy player not exactly what you kind of want it to be. Galen Jacobs says, when did Vanderbilt show how you play SEC ball? That's also a fair question as well, although there are a few SEC teams right now that can't say anything to Vanderbilt. Tennessee can't say anything to Vanderbilt. Georgia can't say anything to Vanderbilt. I guess maybe a few more by the end of the season. I mean, Vandy has won some SEC games as of late.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about this game too, when he kind of says that, hey, we showed them how to play SEC ball. I mean, Vanderbilt was outgained. They were, they had more time of possession for Kansas State. They had more first downs, Kansas State. So it wasn't like, hey, we just beat the tar out of somebody. They beat them on a touchdown that now, I'm not going to say fluky, but you wouldn't say that that's going to happen again if you had it 9 times out of 10.
John Rosado says the nation wants Vandy to win. Maybe that's true. Maybe SEC country is just as tired of Alabama as the rest of the country is. We'll have to see what happens with the result on Saturday. We'll continue to watch that play out. For now, though, let's look at another game where history might be on the line for a long-time team that's been down trying to get back up. It's the subject of item number 4 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and that is Kentucky at home against Florida on Saturday, trying to break a 30-year streak of futility. And we'll have a little more on this coming up later on in the show, but for now, Kentucky also going to great lengths to try to make sure they get as much momentum behind them as possible, because it was announced this week that Kentucky also going to put on the chrome helmets. Now, I think we have a picture of the chrome helmet to show you. I got to tell you, I think this is a pretty cool look. I think the shiny silver helmet is kind of nice here. What scares me, though, if I'm Kentucky, is the fact that this is going to be used as a motivational ploy for the team. The reason why you think that might be the case here, look at this quote from a Kentucky player about what he thinks about the helmets. It says it hypes up the crowd more. This is Kyle Meadows. He's an offensive tackle. It hypes up the crowd more. People like fashion, apparently. I know we're not worried about that, but it gives us more confidence, more swagger. I like the first part of his answer better than the second part. We're not worried about this, more so than it gives us more confidence, more swagger. Yeah. I don't know that I want you to have confidence and swagger right now. I actually want you to be hungry. I want you to be thinking about the previous 30 Kentucky teams who didn't get it done against Florida. Because the truth is, I think you've got a real chance to win this game on Saturday, but don't worry about the fashion statement. Just go out there and play the game.
Yeah, and to me, it does come down to obviously what's on the field. I mean, you're talking to a guy that my uniform changed for home and away games. I mean,
right,
when I was in college, we didn't worry about any kind of chrome helmets or the checkerboard on your sleeve. I don't know. This wasn't something I had to deal with in college, so I can't speak to it much. What I can speak to is the fact that Kentucky, even though everybody's kind of loving on them right now after the South Carolina win, they have got an incredibly tough task. Whatever's going to get the momentum flowing in your corner, I guess, is what you need to use if you're Kentucky. But I'm not sure the chrome helmet's going to rescue you from Florida this weekend.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I don't think that's true. I actually like Kentucky in this game. I think that you're asking a lot for Florida. Coming on the heels of a home game, we're played well enough to win the game, and yet you're going to a Kentucky team here that maybe got off to a little bit of a slow start, but I think it showed some stuff against South Carolina last week. I think South Carolina ranks as a pretty good win right now for Kentucky, and I don't believe that the 30-year history kind of plays in this very much. The Florida players said this week they're not even really aware. They weren't really aware of that. Jim McElwain's certainly done his part to downplay that. So I don't think the 30 years weighs on this game at all. But I do think that when you just look at these two teams side by side, right now the talent level for both these teams, it certainly does not look like one should have beaten the other 30 times in a row, because there's not that disparity between these two teams right now. Florida a little more talented, but not by a wide margin.
Well, and I like Florida obviously better in the front seven than I did South Carolina against Kentucky. I think that really was the story. That that's the anomaly that Kentucky pulled off against South Carolina. Kentucky had the ball for 37 minutes. It wasn't that South Carolina's offense was bad or Jake Bentley was bad. It was this Kentucky didn't allow them to be on the field that much. And I think that's going to be a tough ask if you're asking Kentucky to go out against Florida this week and hold the ball for 37 minutes again. I think there's too much speed and there's too much size in the front seven for Florida and in that secondary to ask them to go out and control the time of possession and the line of scrimmage the way they did against South Carolina. I think that's how Florida begins to take over.
James Patrick asked an interesting question, just to change the subject slightly for a moment. He says, who are your top 3 SEC teams right now? So I think you've got to have Alabama in that group for the moment. I think the other 3, or the other 2, I guess, are still up for grabs. Is there a chance that both those are playing on Saturday between Georgia and Mississippi State? Are those the 3 best teams in the league at the moment?
That's the 3 I've got right now, and it's hard to award any of the other teams just because you only have a 3-game sample. I was before last week. I was ready to put South Carolina in the top 3. I was ready to put LSU in the top 3. You've been ready to put Auburn in the top 3. Florida's always going to be knocking that down. Tennessee as well. And I'd have, all those teams have had those drop-off games. And I think right now, the way that Mississippi State played on offense last week, the way Georgia's been playing on defense, and the way Alabama has been playing as the #1 team, it's hard to argue against any of those three.
James Patrick says Kentucky-Florida is going to be a low-scoring affair. 13-7, 13-10, UK takes it. The lower the scoring the game is, the more I think that does play into Kentucky's hands here. It's a pretty good Wildcat offensive line. Mark Stoops has recruited that offensive line here pretty well. And, while, yes, you saw the big throw from Franks at the end of the game last week, I'm not quite sure what this Gators team's doing offensively as of yet.
Well, the offensive line of Kentucky is definitely talented. I think you haven't had the consistency up front that you thought you would coming into the year. They've definitely missed John Toth. I think that they've had to switch in a ton of players. I think the left guard's the only guy that's taken every snap at his own position. And you thought you'd get a ton of stuff out of Benny Snell and Steven Johnson. Steven Johnson has not been consistent. So I would love to pile on the Cinderella train and crown Kentucky right now, but I think they beat a deeply flawed South Carolina team last week, and I think they struggled in the other two games I've seen them in. So I'm not ready to put them athletically up against Florida right now. I think that Florida wins and covers. I think it's only a 2.5-point spread.
Yeah.
I think that Florida wins and covers that.
Esteban Estevez says the chrome helmets look pretty sweet, so he likes those. Michael Morrow says he's taking Kentucky over Florida all day long. Michael's also a Georgia fan, so you'll take that with a grain of salt, I guess, a little bit as well. That's Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams. This is AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Also, make sure you stick with us a couple minutes from right now. Speaking of the Florida-Kentucky game, we'll look back at the last time Kentucky beat Florida as part of our Tony Sachery's Seasons to Remember. And a really interesting look back at 1986. That's coming up in just a couple of moments. Before that, though, item number 5 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We mentioned Mississippi State a moment ago because of what someone brought up in the comments section. How about these words from CBS Sports college football analyst Aaron Taylor, talking about the most impressive wins from a week ago? Not a surprise necessarily that he ranked Mississippi State near the top of his list, but maybe a little bit intriguing about just how much Taylor likes the Bulldogs. Take a look and see what you think that means for Georgia and Mississippi State coming up on Saturday.
Most impressive victory was Mississippi State's beatdown of LSU, right? They beat LSU like they stole something. Yeah. And now people are saying, oh, man, I told you we shouldn't have hired old. Reminding them of the old Ole Miss days. Mississippi State brought a physicality to that game that I think shocked all of us. I got a chance to see them earlier in the year. I saw some kind of the smackings of that. But seeing what they did to LSU, beating them at their own game, they schemed them up. They beat them down on both sides of the football. I think we all came into the season thinking that Auburn was going to make some noise in the West. I think that team this year is going to.
What was that analysis?
So first of all, please tell me this. We got a lot of people helping us do the show here today. Please tell me that we don't talk over each other and make noises the way those people did. I watched that clip and tried to figure out a way to get it on the show here today. It's like this forced laughter chuckle fest. They're all making a bunch of noises. You got a guy going blah, 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 underneath somebody else while he's talking.
We'll give ourselves a pat on the back.
Surely we let each other have a little more room to talk than that.
Yeah, I think so.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. There's a lot of people on that panel, a lot of people with different opinions.
Point. A lot of people sitting at that desk.
Yeah, I agree with what he said, though. I mean, the way he was delivering it, the way he said that Mississippi State kind of attacked this defensive front and the linebacking core, and obviously it's going to be a tall task to do that against Georgia this week. LSU, a lot of times, too, looked out of place. And you love Dave Aranda as a defensive coordinator. You love him as a coach. But, man, they looked so unprepared in that game against Mississippi State last week. They were kind of running this 3-3 stack. They'd have their defensive ends down in a 4-eye inside of the tackles, easy to get reached, and then they would be outnumbered in the front 7. I mean, they'd run 6 guys, and you'd have Eris Williams block for Nick Fitzgerald, and he'd be up the field for 20, 30 yards. And I think that's going to be a big key to going in this game. Kirby Smart has got to strap it up and have a game plan for Dan Mullen's offense.
So here's a couple things to remember here. And every season's the same way. There's a lot of stuff that seems obviously true in September that we're laughing at by November and really laughing at by mid-October. So, I mean, there's no guarantee that Mississippi State is for real. There's no guarantee we even think that 2 weeks from now, okay? Yeah. So, I mean, let's give credit where credit's due for the victory over LSU. I called this when I had this one. I thought Mississippi State would win the game. But this notion that all of a sudden now that the most dominant offensive and defensive line in the SEC, let's slow down a little bit with that. But it does cause me to want to circle back to a topic we had a little earlier in the show about Georgia's offensive line. And one of the reasons why I think that Kirby Smart maybe feels the need to sort of instill more confidence in his group or maybe show that he actually does have some confidence in his group is because I do think part of what Aaron Taylor says there is correct. That Mississippi State's defensive line is certainly very good, and Georgia can't win the game without getting something from its OL on Saturday. But the overall sort of hype fest coming off Mississippi State because it beat an LSU team that I'm frankly not even sure is ranked in the top 25 by the end of the season, I would probably slow down on that.
Well, and here's the argument I'll make, to anybody that's on the Mississippi State train right now. is that I feel like if, for all the questions you have about Georgia's offensive line, if LSU had attacked Georgia the same way, and if those two teams were playing, Georgia would rack up the same amount of yards and points, in my opinion. It was not only a bad game plan, but they were off assignment-wise. They weren't filling their gaps. They allowed Mississippi State and Nick Fitzgerald and company to set the edge a ton on their defense, and that's just not the LSU we've grown to know. I don't know if it was because they were easing Arden Key back in. I don't know if it was because they were kind of rotating or they had some ejections. It just didn't look like Dave Aranda had that team prepared to play defense against Dan Mullen's offense. It really didn't.
Yeah, and by the way, in the comment section, John Rosado reminding me not to take too much credit for the Mississippi State pick against LSU. He said you also had Tennessee against Florida. But the truth is, I was covering that spread right into the last second. That's a bad beat.
It's a bad beat. There's been a couple of bad beats when you talk about the game this week. I don't think, and here it is, for the chest puffers we have in the comment section, I want to say, I told you Mississippi State would beat LSU. None of y'all had them beating them by 30.
No, that's true.
Nobody had Mississippi State beating LSU by 30. And it was a close game. At the end of the first quarter, still 0-0. Some of the ejections and some things started to fall the way of Mississippi State. LSU had 2 touchdowns called back in the first quarter. So, that game was a little bit of a toss-up, but definitely Mississippi State gets credit for kind of running away with it.
By the way, Jimmy Barnes caught your line early in the show, taking a dig at me for buying into the Auburn hype. He's pointing that out as well. Thanks, Jimmy, for noticing that. This guy's always taking these slides, always taking those jabs anytime he can. Something else that Bo Lynn brought in the comment section, the last time Kentucky beat Florida, gas was just, according to Bo, 89 cents a gallon. You have to go all the way back to 1986 for the last time that happened. But Kentucky beating Florida wasn't the only interesting to happen in the year 1986. Also, a lot of other strange scenarios going on around the SEC there as well. Let's take a look back at 1986 right now with our Tony Sachery's Seasons to Remember.
It's time for Tony Sachery's Seasons to Remember and a look back at 1986. A year in the SEC that ended with LSU claiming the SEC championship and earning a berth to the Sugar Bowl. And while seeing the purple and gold in New Orleans isn't that unusual, other aspects of the 86 season are just plain weird. For instance, Arkansas played Texas A&M that year, just like they will this week. It was one of the season's marquee matchups, but the Razorbacks' 14-10 win against the number 7 Aggies came with both teams playing in the now-defunct Southwest Conference instead of the SEC, which both schools call home today. Also, that season featured Georgia going on the road and getting a win at Auburn in the Deep South's oldest rivalry, only to be showered with water hoses when UGA fans tried to celebrate on the field. However, the weirdest moment of all probably didn't seem so strange at the time. Kentucky beat Florida 10-3. What no one could have known about then, though, was that it would be the last Wildcats win versus the Gators, as Florida's taken 30 straight contests in the series since then. The two teams play again this weekend as well. And no matter the outcome, the result will have everyone thinking back to 1986, a season to remember.
Seasons to Remember here on AT&T's SEC Country Live is brought to you by Tony Sachery's. And if you're looking to spice up your next tailgate party, look no further than Tony Sachery's, tailgating champion since 1972. Use Tony Sachery's marinades on the inside and Tony Sachery's seasonings on the outside for everything from championship chicken to the best-in-class brisket or award-winning wings. Tony Sachery's makes everything taste great. And you're probably too young to remember, but that 86 Georgia-Auburn game, so help me. Y'all, you got to go back and look at this stuff online. The game footage from the end of that game, when they turned the hoses on Georgia fans who were tearing Jordan-Hare Stadium to pieces. Like, we are so politically correct now. These Georgia fans were ripping up the field. Auburn was shooting them with water hoses, and the announcers were on TV describing as if it was somebody swinging a 9-iron in the Masters. They turned on the water hoses now, trying to get these Georgia fans off the field. This is such a strange scenario. It's one of the reasons why I love doing the Tony Sachery Seasons to Remember, because it gives us a chance to go back and think of the SEC in like the 80s was a crazy place to be. Y'all think it's wild now? It was bizarre back then.
Yeah, I wasn't even born yet when that game was on.
Don't tell me that.
Probably your senior year of college.
No, that's not. I was in like the 4th grade. Shut up.
It was probably, BA was probably graduating college, getting his degree at that point. But it did. I've heard stories about that entire season. Obviously, you see Mike Ditka and everything that's going on there. So I have heard a ton of good stories about the SEC in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, really fun stuff. With that, we'll get back to our AT&T SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. And well, a little bit of another problem potentially for Texas A&M. We'll make this the subject of item number 6 here, because you've got Monty Watts, one of the Texas A&M players, giving an explanation for why maybe the Aggies got off to a slow start against Louisiana Lafayette on Saturday. Here's the explanation that he gave. We'll show you the tweet here coming from Aggie Sports. Texas A&M, Monty Watts said he felt like they started slow because there was no motion because it was an early start time. The only problem with that is later on in the game, according to Battalion Sports, Kevin Sumlin says, Armani Watts exhibited great leadership today. Is that true? Can you have someone being a great leader if he's also excuse-making for the early start time, saying that's the reason why we had no emotion against the Raging Cajuns of Louisiana Lafayette?
I think it can be both if Armani Watts is throwing his teammates under the bus and saying everybody else started slow. I'm the one that started really fast. And he had stats to back it up. I think he had 8 tackles, 2 interceptions. He's had 4 turnovers created this year for that defense. So he's been a good player. And so he probably has been a very good leader for this team. But I don't think there's any question about the fact they started slow. They started slow against Nichols, too, and they started really fast against UCLA and then slowed up in the second half. Maybe their time frame is somewhere in the middle of the day.
But here's the problem, though. This week's game against Arkansas in Jerry World is another 11 a.m. start.
Yeah.
I mean, is this what you want to be hearing for Texas A&M? When you got Kevin Sumlin fighting for his job, his players are too sleepy to play?
I got to tell you, I absolutely hated 11 a.m. games.
I'm sure.
It's just, I can't tell you how bad it is because what you're doing, you're having pregame meal at 4 hours before the game, right?
Yeah.
So that puts you at 7 o'clock eating your pregame meal, 6 o'clock wake up call, and you're trying to, get ready and get hyped up for this game. But I sleepwalked into a lot of those 11
So here's the one thing that's different about me. First of all, I didn't play college football, but second of all, I have lived on the East Coast my whole life, or in the Eastern time zone my whole life. So, that start for us is noon here on the Eastern time zone. I live in Georgia, but if you're over in Alabama or in Texas, that early time slot is 11 a.m. So I don't doubt that it's a little tougher to play. But I also know you only get to play 12 of these. You don't get to pick the times that the games begin.
Well, yeah, and it's one of those things where you have to step inside a player's shoes for a minute and understand these are college kids that probably had tests the day before, and then they get to the hotel and everything's been crazy.
They're not taking tests the day before a game.
I'm not giving them an excuse. Obviously, it was on me as a leader for my team to try to get my guys up too. But I'm just telling you, it's harder than you think. It's like, yeah, we're up for it, but are we really up for it?
I mean, I know you want us to think you were a Rhodes Scholar at Alabama, but I would love to see the test that an Arkansas or a Texas A&M player is taking the Friday before the game. Jerry World.
I have no doubts that there's definitely one going on. I promise you, some of those professors that are giving these things out, they have no clue that there's even football being played at these universities. I'm telling you, there is somebody that has dropped a test on college football players on Friday. I have no doubt about it.
If that be the case, then y'all should have gone to Ole Miss.
At
Ole Miss, apparently you don't have that to worry about.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's different everywhere, but it is hard. And I'm not saying that gives Armani an excuse that he's going to come out there and say, hey, we sleptwalk, but it is tough, especially when it's a non-conference opponent. I think it'll be better getting back into SEC play and being at Jerry's World. I think that gives them a lot more hype going into it.
By the way, speaking of Ole Miss, Terry Crews asked, are you wearing an Ole Miss shirt today? No, we asked that. We bring this up every single time.
2 weeks ago I heard that.
This is not an Ole Miss shirt, although it's fancy enough to be one. This is like some hoity-toity Chateau Alon golf club in Georgia. You got to realize, Mike every now and then leaves some of his money laying around. This is a former NFL star, and he can't go more than a couple weeks without reminding us all, you know what? He lives in a different tax bracket than we do.
That is just not
fancy
true.
Chateau Alon. He could be tailgating on the Grove. Even though that's not actually an Ole Miss shirt, he's fancy enough to be tailgating there.
That is just not true.
I like making Mike red.
Oh, man, I'm red right now.
By the way, I've had a hard time this week. I keep getting behind in the comment section. I'm going to try to get caught up here, and we'll see if we can get back to what we're talking about. Let me make Mike happier for a moment, because I just made him mad.
That'd be great. Thank you.
He's big enough sitting next to me. I need to try to make him happy if I can. Let me do item number 7 on our AT&T SEC Country Life First and 10 list. So a topic of concern has been the Alabama defense. I think it's probably fair to say that even for you, having been in Tuscaloosa on Saturday, you kind of came back on Monday with a little bit of an eyebrow raised about what you saw from that defense. Well, Minkah Fitzpatrick, the star safety for Alabama, was asked this week, is it time for your team to have a come-to-Jesus meeting about the fact that you're maybe not stopping opponents the way that you want to? And I thought that Fitzpatrick gave a pretty interesting answer. He says, we ain't even have it yet. I think we practiced really well yesterday, so I think we all got the gist of what happened on Saturday. I don't think words are going to really do anything right now, but action's going to do a whole lot more. He went on to reference the leadership by example he's trying to provide. He talked about Sean Deion Hamilton there as well. So I'll ask you, as a guy that probably had to do some of this stuff as well for some really good Alabama teams in 2008 and 2009, does the leadership by example by your best players work for the Alabama defense, knowing probably how much better they want to get if they want to not just keep pace with the best in the SEC, but Clemson and Oklahoma and the national darlings of the moment?
Well, here's how we approached it when I was at Bama. We did this once a week. I mean, we took the bull by the horns, and before our even first matchup against Virginia Tech in 2009, myself and our leadership council were like, hey, we want to meet with the team. We want to tell everybody what we think our expectations are for this game or for the year. And it was something we continue to do. Every Thursday, we'd meet the team, and the coaches would leave, and all the assistants would leave, and we would get to talk to everybody one-on-one and tell everybody why this game means a lot to us. The captains for that week would get up and speak, and that was a big deal. Now, Sean Deion Hamilton came out after the game against Colorado State and said, you know what, we have to have a come-to-Jesus meeting. I think what Minkah is just saying is, you know what? Once we looked at the film, things looked a little bit better than we thought we did. They've been handcuffed in the packages they could run. They've been down 5 linebackers from where they started the year at. They've had to kind of patchwork this defense. I don't think they've been able to get the right product on the field, and Colorado State took advantage of it. That's a really good football team that's probably going to win a lot of games this year, and they got Alabama on their heels a lot of times in that game.
John D. Giles says, but they don't have the depth in T-Town this year. I mean, is that something you're worried about? Injuries to linebackers, guys lost the NFL. Is there a lack of depth right now for the Alabama defense that's just going to be an issue that Jeremy Pruitt and that group is just forced to deal with?
Yeah, I think when you were coming into the year, you already wondered about that pass rush. All the guys they lost off last year's team, Jonathan Allen and company, are they going to be able to rush the passer again? I think when you got into obviously week 1 against Florida State and you lose 4 of those guys, 2 of them for the year, you're not going to look as good for the next couple of weeks. But I said this yesterday, getting Anthony Jennings back, getting Rashaan Evans back, getting Dylan Moses back, those are going to be things that are going to help this defense. They can also, it's not that they can just rush the passer more. They can run different packages. They have those guys on the field. They can put the right linebackers in, put the right ends in, put the right pass rushers in, and they can do different things defensively than they have the last couple of weeks.
Johari Wershin says, I think these are the 2 worst hacks on my timeline. Listen, there's a lot of bad stuff on Facebook. I'm not telling you we're the best thing on your Facebook timeline, but we can't be the worst.
No,
your timeline's filled with like recipes and political junk. I mean, I'm not telling you we're the best thing going on Facebook, but we're not the worst thing on Facebook. I feel pretty confident saying that.
My question is, how many hacks do you have on your timeline? I mean, how many shows do you have filling up? How often do you spend on Facebook?
Yeah, but listen, nonetheless, even if we are the worst hacks in your timeline, thanks for being patient with us and thanks for being on the show. We certainly appreciate that. We'll look forward to taking a lot more of your comments. By the way, Johari also going back to 1986, Tennessee, Miami, and the Sugar Bowl there. But we're talking about the Sugar Bowl after the '86 season, though, Johari. So thanks for helping us out with that. But LSU wins the SEC in '86, goes on to the Sugar Bowl that year. We appreciate you weighing in on that, and we'll look forward to taking more of your comments here coming up on AT&T's SEC Country Live. For now, let me get to a subject that I would love if it was about any other team. I would have my fangs out right now if we had a quarterback controversy going for any other team in the league. But you know what? This one might be involving the Georgia Bulldogs. So it's not quite as fun for me to talk about, but nonetheless, it is the subject of item number 8 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And there is reason to believe that we have the makings of a quarterback controversy at Georgia. Now, it doesn't exist yet, but based on what Kirby Smart said on Tuesday, we could be on our way to getting there. For those of you who are not Georgia fans, here's the quick backstory. Jacob Eason, former Gatorade Player of the Year, incumbent started at the beginning of the season, injured in Game 1. Jake Fromm comes in for him in the Appalachian State game, started the last 2 games, and Fromm has played okay. Not great, not terrible. Seems to be getting better every week. What happens, though, when Jacob Eason is back? Does he just automatically get his starting job back? Here's how Kirby Smart answered that question on Tuesday.
I don't know that that's a fair question. I think the question is, number one, what is cleared to play? Is that 100% healthy or is that emergency backup? I think a lot of that's determined by how Fromm's playing. I think we'll make that decision when the time comes. It's not like we're going to sit here and make an ultimatum. It's going to come as his health improves.
So the news there from my perspective is that it's a cut and dry thing. Jacob Eason was the starter. If he was automatically going to get that job back, there's no reason for Kirby Smart not to say that there. What Smart leaves the door open for is Fromm, while he's in the game in place of Eason, doing well enough that he remains the quarterback. Yeah. Is that fair to Jacob Eason in your mind?
I don't know that it's fair. I don't think everything in college football is always fair.
That's a good point.
And I think if this were the NFL, I hate guys in the NFL losing their job to injuries because you're going to have in the NFL. The season's so long, the careers are a lot longer in the NFL. You can have those guys come back and resume their job. I think when you talk about college football and you talk about the window you have to win a national title or an SEC title, it's a lot smaller. And I think there's going to be a lot of questions asked if Jake Fromm goes out and beats Mississippi State this weekend and then has the opportunity to go on the road against Tennessee next week and shows well. I don't know how Kirby Smart pulls that trigger. I don't know how you pull a guy that's won all those games up under this football team. I think it starts asking questions in the locker room if you start to take Jake Fromm out at that point.
Corey Pipelayer Kingpin says, what do y'all think about Georgia this year? That's what the Facebook profile says. I'm not sure if any of those are real names, but that's what it says, Corey Pipelayer Kingpin. But nonetheless, he says, what do y'all think about Georgia this year? What I think about Georgia this year is that Georgia is better with 2 quarterbacks. Whether you choose between Fromm or Eason, you let them both play. Georgia is at its best with a healthy Eason and a Fromm both on the field, probably extending this competition that started during the spring actually taking place during the game. Because as I've said on Dog Nation Daily, my show in the mornings before, It's not completely clear to me which of these two quarterbacks is the best between Fromm and Eason right now.
And if this competition extends in the next weekend, say Jake Fromm goes out and is able to win the game against Mississippi State this weekend, Jacob Eason's still not ready to really compete, and he goes on the road and shows well against Tennessee next week, I think it's going to make it that much more clear that Jake Fromm needs to be your guy.
Yeah.
When you look at Jacob Eason's stats from last year, and I wrote them down earlier, he was 48% completion percentage on the road last year. He had some ugly showings in the away games, and I think if Jake Fromm can kind of take this team to the next level and win these away games going away and really play well, I think that's going to be a check mark in his call.
Yeah, you're so right. I'll even include the home game here as well. You're playing the number 17 team with a really good defense on Saturday at Tennessee the following week. I mean, Tennessee's beat Georgia 2 years in a row. Georgia hasn't beaten a lot of ranked teams as of late. If Fromm wins either one of those games, especially if he looks good doing so, then I don't know if very many Georgia fans are going to want to put him on the bench. And that does not mean that Georgia fans don't like Eason. I think there's still a pocket of Georgia fans that are incredibly happy with Eason, and I think he's a popular player overall and deserves to be. But you're not putting Fromm on the bench if he plays well against either Mississippi State or Tennessee.
I think more people would ask questions if you benched Fromm after that than they would if you brought, if you were to let him ride. I think you're going to open yourself up to so much criticism if you take Fromm out of the game at that point. I realize Jacob Eason's the chosen one. I realize he's your 5-star, commitment, and he's stuck with his program even after Mark Richt got fired and everything he's been through. And he showed up and played well last year. And the injury shouldn't take him out of that. But sometimes that happens. And if Jake Fromm is able to show up and win these games and be a big part of this offense doing it, that's what I'm saying. If you're Kirby Smart, I don't know how you pull the trigger and put Jacob Eason back in at that point.
Michael Collin in the comment section, though, says if y'all Georgia haters think that Georgia doesn't have a top 10 defense, you're crazy. And I think Michael's probably right about that. I think this is a really good Georgia defense at the moment, which actually should put less pressure on the quarterback. But the standard for Georgia offensively right now is just being good enough offensively. Can the quarterback be smart enough, successful enough? We actually don't know the answer to that yet, but it is worth pointing out, as Michael says, the Georgia defense is good enough that you're not asking the quarterback to kind of go out there and be, the next Deshaun Watson or anything like that.
Listen, that was the blueprint for our 2009 national title when I played at Bama. I mean, we didn't have a great player at the quarterback position, but we had somebody serviceable, Jake Fromm-like. We played well on the offensive line. We had a great running back in Mark Ingram. We had a great backup in Trent Richardson. And we had a decent set of core receivers. And Julio Jones was still young at that point, but he was pretty good. And so that was the blueprint. And that's what Kirby Smart's seen. And he knows that if you have a dominant defense and an offense that can control the line of scrimmage and control the time of possession, that you're going to win a lot of those games. Just don't make the big errors. That's been what he's been asking Jake Fromm so far in his starts this year.
Aaron Burrell, Ray Miller, Kip Lees, thank you so much for the kind words. Really appreciate that. Michael Collum, also kind words. We really appreciate that. We'll look forward to having more of your comments coming up on the program. Let me shift gears instead now for a moment and kind of bring up what might be a little bit of a juicy rumor. We'll get to that in a moment. Let me remind you that that's Mike Johnson. My name is Brandon Adams. This is AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. And as far as that juicy rumor, it's the subject of item number 9 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So Dennis Dodd, writer for CBSSports.com, wrote something very provocative this week about Mississippi State coach Dan Mullen. He says, at this moment, Mullen is the hottest coach in America, coming off the win against LSU. Now what does he do with that label? Once again, he absolutely has to get out of Starkville. First of all, if you're a Mississippi State fan, I'm not quite sure how you take that. But what do you make of the notion that Dennis Dodd is trying to push him out of Starkville, Mississippi, and even suggesting that maybe Texas A&M would be the landing spot for Mullen, coaching somewhere else in the SEC? Does that rumor make sense to you?
Well, listen, I think you and I both probably have behind the scenes heard a ton of things about Dan Mullen wanting to get out of Starkville. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a reason for that. I don't think it's a knock against Mississippi State. I think he's done great things there. He's taken them to heights that they were not used to in Starkville before he got there. I mean, Sylvester Croom's the guy he took over for. But I think there is a ceiling at Mississippi State. I think it's been said before that you can only do so much at Mississippi State, especially in that division you're in. I think that if he were to take the job at Texas A&M, all of a sudden he has the recruiting bed. All of a sudden he has the resources to be able to get his career to the next level. And so I don't think it would be a bad move. Are people in Mississippi State going to be absolutely ticked off? Yes, they should. But I think if you're Dan Mullen, you really have to look at all the angles here and make a good decision for yourself personally. And if Texas A&M job comes open and it's offered to Dan Mullen, I'm packing my bags and heading down to College Station.
The reason why I don't think that Dan Mullen can pretend that he hasn't shopped around is his name popped up for the LA Rams, for goodness sakes. There's no...
It's popped up for a few jobs.
Yeah, but most of what it pops up for, though, are like the big Midwest jobs. Mullen's not a Southerner. He has no ties to the South, at least in his heritage going back in his family. So, when you've had one of these big Ten jobs open up, that felt like something that Dan Mullen might get involved with. But none of those are coming available for a while. I mean, James Franklin is cemented at Penn State. Jim Harbaugh is going to be at Michigan for a while. Urban Meyer is going to be at Ohio State for a while. Those big Big Ten jobs are not coming available, and there's really no big Northeast job that makes sense for Dan Mullen. So, those felt like the kind of jobs he wanted more. Do you take the Texas A&M job? The thing about Mullen at Texas A&M, it does not feel like a great fit. And listen, y'all, I love coaching rumors as much as anybody in the world does. But Mullen has made his bones about getting the junior college guys and, the redshirt guys. And he does a lot of that kind of stuff to sort of build his roster. Texas A&M is about signing 1 million 4- and 5-star recruits. That's actually not a level of experience that Dan Mullen has. I don't know that he's as good a fit in College Station as he would be for some other places where they're not going to expect you to recruit quite as much.
I'm going to give you a little bit of a hot take here because when we were talking about this building up into the show and we were talking about that job, if I'm Dan Mullen and I'm taking a look around the SEC and around other college jobs that might come open in the next year or two, I have to wonder if that job in Gainesville within the next year or two, somebody that really needs you to bring along a quarterback, which God knows we've talked that Dan Mullen can do, bring along quarterbacks, all of a sudden you have that recruiting hotbed, you have the defensive players to get it done. If I'm Dan Mullen, I might think about passing up on that Texas A&M job to get that job in the SEC.
That's a really good point because I do believe that McElwain is on, and I know that I'm on an island when I say this, some of y'all think that I'm just picking on Florida again, but McElwain, to go back to recruiting, I mean, he missed so badly with his 2015 and 2016 recruiting class that I do think it's hurt his roster right now. Now, if he goes on to win this season, he's got Matt Corral coming in for 2018. We had a guy in the comment section a moment ago that said Corral's going to start from the word go at Florida. Corral could save McElwain at Florida, and that Florida job might not ever come open. But if things keep trending the way they are right now for Florida, I agree with you that McElwain could sort of wear out his welcome there quicker than a lot of people think. He doesn't show up on some of these hot seat lists. That's the phrase that I'm looking for. He doesn't show up on those right now, but that doesn't mean that he couldn't appear there eventually. And if he does, Mullen's obviously a really interesting name because that's a guy that Florida fans love going back to the time that he was the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and listen, nobody loves Jim McElwain more than me, but what was he brought to Florida to do? Bring along quarterbacks, make this offense look like it was serviceable again. The offense has not looked good. And if you're going off the first 2 weeks of this season, they have a lot of ground to make up if they're going to look good by the end of the season. I'm not saying that he's going to get fired this year or next year, but I think if you're Dan Mullen and you're going to hop to one of these SEC jobs, I think you might take a look down in Gainesville and wonder how much longer that experiment's going to go on.
So a lot of people weighing in on this. James Crump says he probably only leaves Mississippi State for Florida. Go back to what you said. Yeah. Florida's going to keep McElwain, though. I hope James Crump says that. Justin Grant brings up an interesting name. How about Nebraska?
Yeah,
I mean, Mike Riley's in serious trouble at Nebraska.
But I don't know that there's enough of a recruiting angle at Nebraska. I think the reason they've had trouble since the mid-'90s is because you just can't recruit that top-tier talent to go in there in Nebraska. I think that's going to be their problem for a while.
Dietrich Frazier says, would Mullen go to Tennessee? First of all, Texas A&M's a better job right now than Tennessee is.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. And from everything we've heard from a lot of Tennessee fans, they love Butch Jones. They want him to stay around for a while.
I don't know if that's true anymore. Dave Chauncey says Dan Mullen's also from the Northeast, not the Midwest. He's now been in the South for 12 years. The problem with that, though, Dave, is there's no Northeast job for him to take. Penn State, if you count that as a Northeast job, I know it's Western PA, but if you count that as a Northeast job, it's not coming available. And there's nothing else in the Northeast that Mullen would even go to. Brian Kelly gets fired at Notre Dame. Is Mullen a candidate for Notre Dame?
I don't know that Mullen fits at Notre Dame. I really don't. I know that they love these offensive guru type of guys, but to me, when you look at the Northeast and when you look at the Midwest, I'm not sure any of them are more than just a lateral move at this point for Mississippi State. He's done some good things. He's built that program up to a new level. I think he is waiting right now and biding his time until that big, really top shelf job comes open, that top 5 job that he wants.
By the way, Greg Steele weighing in on what we said about Jim McElwain. He says Muschamp's the problem at Florida. Greg, you can't blame the stuff on Muschamp. Muschamp's a much better recruiter at Florida than Jim McElwain's ever been. Now, we'll see what the 2018 class turns out to be, but y'all can't keep kicking around Muschamp. And the fact of the matter is, he brought in a lot of talent that Jim McElwain used.
And I've seen Jim McElwain do it, and that's why it continues to puzzle me, is why this offense, they don't look like a bad offense. It doesn't look like they lack talent. They just look, they just can't get it together. It doesn't even look like they're doing things well. I don't know if Nussmeier's the next guy out if they don't get things turned around this year, but I would think they would have to point in that direction if Jim McElwain's going to go into a 4th year. He's probably going to have to do it with a different offensive coordinator.
All right, let's jump into item number 10 on our AT&T SEC Country Live 1st and 10. We started the show by playing a little audio of Tennessee defensive coordinator Bob Shoop defending Butch Jones. How about his explanation here for the last-second touchdown that wins the game for Florida? A lot of fans, not just Vols fans, but college football fans in general, kind of want to know what exactly was going on there for Tennessee. What were they thinking? Well, here Bob Shoop gives an explanation. Even if you don't agree with it, I think you have to give him credit for being pretty thorough here. Here's Bob Shoop with the explanation.
Certainly we're talking when we had possession of the ball as a defensive staff, well, what do you think? Okay, if we score a touchdown, here's what they're going to do. If they kick a field goal to tie the game, here's what they're going to do. As you guys may or may not know, Florida has an outstanding kicker. I mean, a guy can kick 55, 60-yard field goals. And so when they got that first down, we thought they were going to play for, getting the ball in that 35 to 40-yard area and kick a long field goal. And that's still, if you watch the play, to describe the last touchdown as a Hail Mary is an inaccurate description of the play. To me, the description, I would describe it as a basketball player hitting a three-quarter court shot to win a game at the end of the game. I mean, that's what it was more like than anything. It was a fluky type play. Not apologizing, not making excuses or anything like that.
So listen, I think that Shoop's absolutely right when he says, hey, you got to play against the field goal. Florida's got a great kicker. They also had a timeout. That's totally fair. It still doesn't make sense to see, Tyree Cleveland guarded by a single safety as opposed to, something a little more designed to protect him. But I know a lot of Florida fans are going to be upset by the line there at the end about this was just a fluky thing. It was the equivalent of a three-quarter, court shot in basketball. A lot of Florida fans, I imagine, may take some umbrage with that description.
I think they're going to be mad about it. And I think they've been mad at us all week for calling it a Hail Mary. But I think there is some truth to it. I think that you have to guard against certain things when you're on defense in that situation. A lot of times what these offensive coordinators do, they'll run as many wide receivers as they can, and then they'll have a route undercut, and that way they can throw the out to the sideline. That's probably what they were guarding against. That's how the safety probably got on Tyree Cleveland at the end of that play. This is exactly what I said yesterday. They had a timeout left in the bank. The way that Felipe Franks came out of this play and the way he looks like he's going to do one of these crossing routes, I don't blame them for defending it the way they did, and I think his explanation was spot on. I know that he says three-quarter shot attempt, and it's a prayer, and it probably is in a lot of circumstances. But I'm kind of with you at the end, though. I think you have to have a better attention to Tyree Cleveland right now.
Now, in defense of Florida, what makes it a little harder to buy is kind of like a three-quarter court prayer shot Hail Mary at the end of a basketball game is. Orlando Sentinel actually unearthed a tweet from Felipe Franks back in July of he and Tyree Cleveland in the indoor practice facility at Florida actually practicing this play. Take a look at this and see if you think it's actually that big of a fluke with Franks and Cleveland essentially working on the route, working on the throw. This is coming from Felipe Franks' Twitter. That's basically exactly what they did in the game on Saturday. Credit the Orlando Sentinel for finding that tweet. But, I mean, the idea of buying this as a fluke a little harder to do given that fact, right?
I mean, we are getting killed right now in the comment section. These Florida
Not me, it's Bob Shoop who said it.
And listen, I'm not ready to say it was a fluke. It was a well-designed play, and it was. I will say it's a prayer, though. It wasn't a Hail Mary, but it was a prayer. Because if you're that confident and you think Felipe Franks is just that good to where he's throwing over the top 63 yards, but why haven't you been doing it the whole game? That's why I call it a prayer. That's my point. If you're that good and the receiver's just that, he's just that fast. Why didn't we see that for the first, 58, 59 minutes and whatever, seconds?
Chase Toole says the only thing fluky about it was that Shoop didn't recognize it as the same play that beat them in 2015. Well, he was in College Station or Happy Valley in 2015. That may be the part there. Greg Steele says fluke. Look at the replay. Powell was open deep also. Chris Allison says that's not a Hail Mary. It was a pass. So as you said, a lot of Florida fans weighing in. But you can't be mad at us. It's Bob Shoop. He's the guy that said it.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm the one that showed the video of Felipe Franks practice.
And I'm with him. It wasn't a Hail Mary. You're not throwing a jump ball in the end zone. But by no means am I not ready to call it a prayer. That's exactly what it was. There was no time left on the clock, and he was heaving it up as far as he could, hoping somebody would catch it.
But the best point made on the show all day is if you can do that at the end of the game against Tennessee, then how about you do it all Saturday against Kentucky?
That's my point.
Go out there and just light the scoreboard on fire.
Exactly. I mean, we all had trouble getting in the end zone the whole game, so I'm not ready to say that was just part of the plan.
All right, Chase Toole says he knows that Shoop wasn't there, but it's the DC's job to look at the film. Chase, on that point, I think you're 100% right. I will agree with you on that. Hey, we actually had some big news yesterday about the 2018 season. Can we talk about this for a moment?
Yeah.
We'll make it a part of our AT&T look ahead. By the way, AT&T, proud sponsor of SEC Country Live, AT&T, entertainment your way. So 2018 season for the SEC announced yesterday. Some marquee matchups in Week 1 for the 2018 schedule. You've got Alabama-Louisville in Orlando, Auburn-Washington in Atlanta. That's the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. LSU-Miami in Arlington. Ole Miss, Texas Tech in Houston. Tennessee, West Virginia in Charlotte. Which of these games jumps out as likely the most intriguing to you?
There's a bunch of them. I think when you look at how that sets up, Ole Miss playing anybody, next year is going to be a little bit of a head scratcher. But Tennessee and West Virginia, I think they're within enough of a geographic range where that kind of, that becomes a big deal.
The question is, will Butch Jones be coaching for Tennessee in that game? Will Matt Luke be coaching for Ole Miss in that game? Will Gus Malzahn be coaching for Auburn against Washington? The SEC, in terms of living up to its billing of these sort of major league non-conference openers, there may be new look coaches in like 3/4 of those games.
Well, and will Chris Peterson still be at Washington in that game? There's a chance he still moves on and gets a better job offer as well.
That is a really good point there as well. Make that your AT&T look ahead. All right, that's Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams. We're AT&T's SEC Country Live. You know, each and every day we like to close up the show the same way, much like Tennessee coach Butch Jones, who has been kicked around all week here on this program, is looking for champions of life. Well, we're also looking for our champions of life on this show. And speaking of Tennessee, the champion of life today has somewhat of a Tennessee tie-in, because what Jim Dunaway unearthed on Twitter here from Texas A&M on Saturday, apparently they've taken a page from Tennessee's playbook with their own turnover trash can. Now, we showed this to you a couple weeks ago. I even brought my own trash can out here on the set. Of all the things to copy and all the things in college football, why in the world would Texas A&M want to copy a trash can from Tennessee?
Let me point out to you what's smart about this, though. The trash can says turnovers. It doesn't have your team name. It doesn't say Team 121 and have the big power T on it. It says turnovers. And I think that you're just opening yourself up for so much by putting the power T on it and Team 121. That's really what my biggest argument was against Tennessee doing it. I think they made a smart move by putting turnovers on it.
Although to prospective coaches who may be on next year's hot seat list, just pay attention to who's using trash cans this year.
Cans,
Butch Jones. Just keep that in mind for your own hot seat status next summer, that the guys that are dealing with that this year both use trash cans. Let's see how that works out for them.
Colorado State showed up with a championship belt at Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa this weekend. So
I like.
Yeah,
that's Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams. Thanks for being with us here on AT&T's SEC Country Live. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast. If you want to listen to the audio version of the show, you can also give us a rating and review there on iTunes. That's a big help for us. And share the show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know we're doing AT&T's SEC Country Live, talking SEC football for an hour each and every afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm back again for 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of AT&T's SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day.